Champagne flutes were already out when my father looked across the table at me and said, "You know, Vivienne, your brother is closing a seven-figure deal next month. What exactly have you been doing for the past 8 years?" He didn't lower his voice. He didn't even check if anyone was listening. He said it the way you'd comment on the weather, casually, like it cost him nothing. Like I cost him nothing. I was sitting at my parents' dining room table in Oakville, the same table where I'd done my homework every night for 12 years, the same table where I'd eaten 100 Sunday dinners. My brother Spencer's engagement party was in full swing around us. My mother had rented extra chairs. There were flowers from some boutique in Burlington. The whole house smelled like cedar and white wine, and my father was asking me, in front of Spencer's future in-laws, what exactly I had been doing with my life. I said, "I'm with the CBSA, Dad. I've told you that." He waved his hand. Customs. Right. The way he said it, like customs was something you did when you couldn't do anything real. My future sister-in-law's father, a man named Douglas who'd driven up from Hamilton and already had 2 glasses in him, laughed politely and changed the subject. I excused myself to get more water and stood alone in my parents' kitchen for a long moment, looking out the window at the backyard where Spencer and I used to play road hockey on Sunday mornings. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that a lot. I had been with the Canada Border Services Agency for 8 years by then. I'd started right out of university, worked my way into an intelligence role, spent 3 years in a joint task force with the RCMP out of the Windsor Corridor, one of the busiest smuggling entry points in the country. I wasn't supposed to talk about most of what I did. That's the nature of the work. You build cases quietly, over months, sometimes years. You don't get press releases. You don't get speeches at family dinners. Spencer was in commercial real estate. He was good at it, genuinely. He had a gift for reading people, and an even better gift for reading markets, and by 32, he'd built something real. I was proud of him, actually. I just wish the comparison wasn't so constant, so effortless on my father's part, like breathing. My father, Walter, had started a property management company in the 90s and built it steadily over 2 decades into something substantial. He managed residential and commercial buildings across southern Ontario, and at its peak the company had a strong reputation. He was respected. He was the kind of man who got invited to speak at local business association dinners. He coached minor hockey for 6 years when we were kids, and half the fathers in our neighborhood still thought of him as one of the good ones. He was also, I would eventually learn, not entirely the man I thought he was. But that came later. That night I drove home to my apartment in Hamilton along the QEW, with the windows cracked even though it was October, because I needed the cold air on my face. I kept replaying his voice. Customs. Right. I had a file open on my laptop when I got home. I'd been working a secondary assignment for 3 weeks. A financial irregularity flagged through a routine commercial lease audit. It was small on the surface. A numbered company with questionable ownership structure, several commercial properties generating rental income that didn't quite match the reported figures. The kind of thing that gets kicked to our financial crimes unit and sits in a pile for months unless someone decides to pull the thread. I'd volunteered to pull the thread. That's how it started. I poured a glass of water and sat down and opened the file. The numbered company was called 2847963 Ontario Inc. It held leases on 4 commercial units in the Hamilton and Burlington area. The declared beneficial owner was a property management firm. The property management firm's name was a numbered company too, which pointed back to a numbered holding company registered in 2011. I spent 40 minutes that night just mapping the structure on paper, trying to understand who ultimately owned what. I almost didn't catch it. I was tired, and my mind kept drifting back to the dinner party, and at some point I got up to make tea. When I sat back down and looked at the registration documents again, I noticed a name I recognized. Not my father's name. Mine. My name, Vivienne Aldrich, appeared as a signing officer on a 2019 amendment to one of the holding companies. I had never signed anything for a numbered company. I didn't own property. I had no side business, no investment portfolio, nothing that would put my name on a corporate document. I'd been 26 in 2019, 2 years into my CBSA posting, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Windsor and working 14-hour days. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and didn't open it again until morning. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks felt like, because it wasn't exciting. It wasn't like the movies. It was slow and nauseating, and there were several nights when I came home and just sat on my kitchen floor eating crackers because I didn't have the energy to make dinner, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I was finding. I requested the full corporate registry history through our internal access. I pulled the associated CRA filings. I mapped every numbered company that touched any of the 4 properties, and I traced each one back to its origins. It took me 11 days. At the end of 11 days, I had a clear picture. My name appeared on 3 separate amendment documents filed between 2018 and 2021. In each case, my name was used to designate a signing officer or director of a numbered company that held commercial leases. Those companies were connected, through a chain of holding structures, to my father's property management firm. The income flowing through those structures had been underreported to the CRA by a significant amount across 4 tax years. The leases had been artificially inflated to move money between related parties, and my name, my real name, my SIN connected name, had been put on the documents to create a layer of apparent legitimacy and distance from my father's primary company. Someone had forged my signature 3 times. On regulated corporate filings. And because my name was there, if anyone ever audited those structures, I was the one who would have to explain them. I had been used as a shield. By my own family. I didn't call my father. I knew I couldn't. If I called my father and told him what I'd found, one of 2 things would happen. Either he'd deny it completely and immediately move to clean the paper trail, or, and this frightened me more, he'd involve Spencer, who'd involve lawyers, and the whole thing would get buried under privilege and amended filings before I could do anything. I also couldn't tell anyone at work. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope, because the moment I disclosed a personal connection to an open file, I'd be removed from it. Standard conflict protocol. I called my friend Bea instead. Bea had been my roommate in 2nd year at Western, had worked in corporate law for 5 years before moving to compliance at a Bay Street firm. She wasn't the right person professionally, but she was the right person professionally. I needed someone who could tell me I wasn't crazy. I met her at a coffee shop on James Street North on a Thursday afternoon and put the printouts on the table between us. She read in silence for several minutes. Then she looked up. Vivienne. She said my name very carefully. Do you understand what this is? I think so. Your name is on these. You work for CBSA. I know. If someone looks at you before they look at your father. I know, Bea. She pressed her hands flat on the table. You need a lawyer. Before you do anything else, you need a lawyer who is entirely separate from any professional connection to you or your family. And then you need to decide whether you're going to disclose this internally, because if someone else finds it first, then I look like I was hiding it. Yes. I drove home and searched for 3 hours that night. I needed a tax and corporate fraud lawyer with no Ontario real estate connections, which narrowed the field more than I expected. I found a firm in Ottawa, Tremblay and Associates, that specialized in CRA disputes and financial misrepresentation. I sent an email at 11:30 at night outlining the situation in broad terms and asking for an urgent consultation. They called me the next morning. I won't share everything from those conversations because some of it is still formally documented, but I want to be honest about the part that almost broke me. About 3 weeks into working with my lawyer, she confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't let myself fully believe. The signature on all 3 documents was not mine, but it was close enough. Drawn, my lawyer said, from a copy of my signature on a lease agreement I'd signed as a tenant years earlier. Someone had scanned it. Someone in my family had kept a copy of a routine lease document I'd signed at 23 and used it to put my name on corporate filings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. My lawyer's name was Annette, and she was careful and methodical, and she did not let me get emotional during our calls, which I needed. She also said, "You should know that this is going to cause serious harm to people close to you." Before we proceed formally, you need to understand that and be certain. I thought about my father saying customs. Right, I said, I'm certain. We filed a formal disclosure with the CRA's Criminal Investigations Program in the second week of December. Simultaneously, I disclosed the conflict of interest to my supervisor at CBSA and was removed from the original file as expected. My supervisor was quiet on the phone for a moment and then asked if I was all right. I said yes. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push. The investigation that followed was not mine to run. That was the hardest part, handing it over. Watching from the outside while people I didn't know worked through documents I'd spent weeks mapping. I had no control. I went to work every day, processed my regular caseload, drove home, ate dinner, went to bed. I didn't call my parents. I didn't go back to Oakville. Spencer texted me twice asking why I'd been quiet, and I said I was busy with a case, which was true in a way. Christmas came. I didn't go home. I told my mother I had work obligations, which she accepted with a quietness that suggested she already knew something was wrong. My mother is not a cruel person. She is the kind of person who is very loyal to the man she married and very good at not looking too closely at things that might require her to make a choice. I understood that about her even then. I didn't blame her for it. Not then, not now. But I also couldn't sit at that table in December and pretend. Spencer called on Boxing Day. I let it go to voicemail. The investigation took 7 months. In late July, the CRA issued formal reassessments against my father's property management company and 2 of the numbered holding companies. The reassessments covered 4 tax years and totaled just under $340,000 in unpaid tax, penalties, and interest. Separately, the forgery of my signature on regulated corporate documents was referred to the Ontario Provincial Police's Financial Crimes Unit. My father was contacted by investigators. His lawyer, a man I'd never heard of, retained apparently the previous spring, which told me he'd known something was coming, advised him not to speak to anyone. Spencer found out the following week. He called me from a number I didn't recognize, which is how I knew he knew. If he'd called from his regular phone, he was calling as my brother. The unknown number meant he was calling as someone who understood the situation clearly and wanted to measure what I'd say before he said anything himself. I answered. He didn't ask how I was. He said, "Did you do this?" I said, "Someone put my name on corporate documents without my knowledge, Spencer. I disclosed it. Do you understand what this means for Dad? I understand what it would have meant for me if someone had found it first." He was quiet for a moment. Then, he said he was going to fix it. He said he would have fixed it before anyone found out. I thought about that word, fix. Fix it quietly, the way you fix a leaking tap before you sell a house. Put a patch over it, list it, and let the next person deal with the rust underneath. He used my name, I said, 3 times over 3 years. Spencer didn't say anything. My SIN is attached to those filings, I said. I could have lost my security clearance. I could have lost my job. I could have been charged. The line was quiet for a long time. I know, Spencer said finally. His voice sounded different. Smaller. I know, Vivienne. I didn't ask whether he'd known. I decided I didn't want to know the answer. I still haven't asked. My father called me in August. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was on the couch reading and his name came up on my phone, and I sat with it in my hand for a full minute before I answered. He didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that. He said there were things I didn't understand about how the business had run during a difficult period. He said the structure had been a temporary measure. He said a good accountant could have cleaned it up before it became a problem, and if I had come to him directly rather than going to outside parties. Those outside parties are the Canada Revenue Agency, I said. You know what I mean? I do know what you mean, I said, and I want you to know that I know exactly what you mean. He stopped talking. You put my name on those documents, I said. My name, not yours, not a numbered company, not some shell. Mine. Because if anyone looked, I would be the one who had to explain it. And you did that while I was working a federal job with a security clearance, and you knew that, and you did it anyway. The line was very quiet. I've spent 8 years doing a job you think is embarrassing, I said. I've spent 8 years working cases I can't tell you about because they're classified, building a professional record that could have been destroyed overnight if any of this had come back to me wrong. And you sat at your own table and asked me what I'd been doing with my life. My father said, Vivienne, I'm done, I said. I need you to understand that I'm not angry. I'm done. I ended the call. The OP-Pay investigation concluded the following spring. My father's company entered into a compliance agreement with the CRA covering the reassessed amounts plus a civil penalty. The forgery matter resulted in a formal charge under the Criminal Code of Canada, uttering a forged document. He pled guilty to a single count. He received a conditional discharge with a fine and a period of probation, no custodial sentence. I wasn't in the courtroom. I'd been told I didn't need to be, and I chose not to go. Some people will judge that choice. I've thought about it a lot. What I decided, eventually, was that I'd already said everything I needed to say on a Sunday afternoon in August, on the phone, with no audience and no performance. I didn't need the room. What I did need, and this took me longer to understand, was the conversation I had with my mother in September of that year, 6 months after the court date. She called and asked if she could come for lunch. Just the two of us at my apartment. I said yes. She brought butter tarts from a bakery in Burlington that we'd gone to since I was small. She put them on the counter and didn't say anything about them, just started making tea, and I let her, because she needed something to do with her hands. We sat at my kitchen table and she said, I didn't know about the documents. I said, I know. I want you to believe that. I do. She looked out the window for a moment. The trees on my street had just started to turn that first orange that comes in early October in Hamilton, that particular light. She said, I think I knew there were things I wasn't supposed to look at. I think I made a choice not to look. She stopped. That's not the same as not knowing, is it? No, I said. It isn't. I'm sorry, Vivienne. She said it quietly, without drama, without asking me to say it was all right. She just said it and let it sit there. I poured the tea. We ate the butter tarts and talked about other things. Her garden, a trip she was thinking about taking to Prince Edward Island, a book she'd been reading. Normal things. Before she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time, the way she used to when I was small and had done something that frightened her, and I let her. Spencer and I talked properly for the first time at Christmas that year. Almost 14 months after the investigation started. He came to Hamilton. He brought wine and takeout from a place on Ottawa Street that I'd mentioned once months earlier, and the fact that he'd remembered it and found it made me think that maybe we were going to be okay eventually. He said, I want to say I'm sorry for the phone call. I said, I know. Not just for how I sounded, for the question I asked, whether you did it. He shook his head. That was wrong. You'd been used, and I asked you if you were the one who'd done something. That was wrong. You were scared, I said. That's not an excuse. No, I said, but it's a reason, and I can hold both. We ate and talked for a few hours, and at some point he told me that his engagement was still on track. The wedding was set for the following June, and that he hoped I'd be there. I said I'd be there. I was there. I wore a blue dress. I danced with my mother to a tragically hip song that she'd loved since the 90s. I didn't speak to my father, who was there with a quietness about him I'd never seen before, a man occupying a smaller amount of space than he used to. He nodded at me once across the room. I nodded back. That was enough. I am not going to tell you that my father became a different person, because I don't know whether he did, and I'm not sure it matters to me anymore. I'm going to tell you what I know for certain. My name is no longer on any corporate document in this country except the lease for my own apartment. My security clearance is intact. My record at CBSA has never been cleaner. I am 33 years old, and I am good at my job, and I know my own worth with a clarity I didn't have before all of this happened. Because having your name used against you, quietly, by someone who assumed you would never find out, teaches you exactly who you are when it matters. The last time I filled out a federal disclosure form, there was a line asking me to identify any financial or legal issues that might affect my suitability for classified work. I checked the box marked no issues. I checked it without hesitating. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the phone call with my father, not the courtroom, not even the morning I first saw my name on those documents. It's a smaller moment than any of those. It's me, sitting on my kitchen floor at 11 o'clock at night, eating crackers, too tired to cook, trying to decide whether what I'd found was really what I thought it was. That's the moment that changed everything. Not because of what I did next, but because of what I refused to do, which was look away. I think about cause and effect a lot now, more than I used to. Every choice my father made had a shape to it. He didn't forge my signature once in a moment of panic. He did it 3 times over 3 years, each time choosing to reach a little further, to trust a little more in the idea that I would never find out, or that if I did, I would be too afraid of the fallout to act. That confidence, that assumption, was itself a kind of consequence. It grew out of years of watching me stay quiet at dinner tables while he said things like customs. Right. He'd read my silence as permission. He'd read my patience as weakness. What he hadn't counted on was that the same steadiness that made me seem invisible at family dinners was exactly what made me good at the work I did. The ability to sit with uncomfortable information, to map a complicated structure without flinching, to keep going when the answer you're getting isn't the one you wanted. Those aren't qualities that announce themselves loudly. They don't show up in engagement party conversations, but they're real and they matter, and they were mine long before any of this happened. I'm not going to pretend I handled all of it gracefully. There were weeks when I was genuinely frightened, not of my father, but of what disclosure might cost me professionally, of whether anyone would believe that my name was there without my knowledge, of whether 8 years of careful work could survive being adjacent to a fraud investigation. That fear was real. I sat with it. I made decisions anyway. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this story. If they take anything, integrity isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to do the right thing while the fear is still fully present in your chest. My lawyer Annette said something to me early on that I've thought about many times since. She said, "You need to be certain before we proceed, because this will cause serious harm to people close to you." She wasn't warning me away from it. She was making sure I understood the weight of what honesty actually costs sometimes. Not the easy honesty, the kind that only requires courage when nothing's at stake, but the real kind, the kind that asks you to hold 2 things at once: love for someone and accountability for what they did. I loved my father. I still do, in the complicated, diminished way you love someone once you fully understand who they are. That love didn't protect him from consequences, and it shouldn't have. The consequences came because actions have weight, and weight eventually lands somewhere. What I chose was where it would land, not on me, not buried quietly in amended filings, but where it belonged. Spencer remembered the name of a takeout place I'd mentioned once in passing. That's a small thing, but small things are often how people show you who they're trying to become. I'm still watching. I'm still deciding. And I know my own name now, what it means, what it's worth, and exactly who gets to sign it.